and I won't. You can touch that if you like to. He's an amazing source of information about CSUN days of yore, which is always interesting for us in a lot of ways. He's a partner in Greenwood Associates, a prominent local cultural resource management firm. John also knows just about everything there is to know about archaeology in the broader Southern California region. So he can always answer a few questions about that. He, for instance, was a great assistance to our recent MA student, Ellie Rarescheid. He worked very closely with John on some of the things he was doing, and we really appreciated that assistance that went through. He's worked off and on with some of our collections. Projects that are near and dear to us are also near and dear to him. He's come today to talk in particular about the archaeology of the San Fernando Valley. Now that the courses are starting to get so we're focused on some of the details we've spent last week in the special collections in the OVA library, we're starting to deal with nitty-gritty, the nature of the information we have available, both historical, archaeological, ethnographic will come. The other class has been to the San Fernando Valley Museum. We've got some field trips coming up. So it's really been time to get, I think, to grips with some of these kinds of issues in a very tangible way. And I can think of no better way to start with that than to hear from our very good colleague, John Foster. So thanks for coming, John. Thanks very much. Turn off one of those lights. Is that okay with you?
Sure. No, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure. Is this the back?
That would back it up. That one there.
And then we'll space it.
Yeah, that one, I don't know what that will do. Touch that one. that will back it up and that will space it.
Okay. I'll try to keep that in mind.
Just yell, and I'll jump up.
Hi, my name is John Foster. I'm the senior archaeologist at Greenwood Associates. I've been doing archaeology in Southern California for the last 45 years, and I hope to do it for a few more years beyond that. What you're going to see this afternoon are two projects that I've worked on for quite a long time. The first project is the San Fernando Mission Church, and I worked on that in 1973 under Dr. Roger Kelly, who was the senior archaeologist at Cal State Northridge at the time, or San Fernando Valley State College in those days. The other project I'm going to talk about tonight is the Campo de Cahuenga adobe over on Lancashire Boulevard, which was an outpost of the San Fernando Mission, and that was built around 1812. As part of that project was part of the Metro Rail Red Line project that we did from 91 through 2004. So it was couple of things that I want to point out in this lecture is that when we did the archaeological work at the church in 73 with Dr. Kelly, we had no background information on the church at all. We walked into this project blind and tried to find everything that we could on the project. The Campo de Cahuenga project, we walked in with 3 years of research. We walked in with local people who had expertise in the area. And so we had the best and greatest amount of support that you could possibly ask for. The MTA people wanted to destroy the adobe that we had found there. And so it took about 3 years of finagling and protesting and things like that so that we eventually were able to preserve the site intact and then make it into an interpretive center on top of that. So without too much ado, we'll get into San Fernando Mission. You're probably all familiar, well maybe you're not familiar with where the mission is, but it's up there. So this is the basic church area. Let's see if I can get my bearings here. This is the church up here, or chapel as it's sometimes called. This is the convento building here, or right here. This is what you see when you drive down Veranda Avenue or San Fernando Mission Road there. What happened was that in 1971 we had the San Fernando earthquake, and let's get through this. The mission was set in 1795. We had the earthquake. If you have questions or anything like that, feel free to ask. Dr. Roger Kelly and Father Freelo called us up at the Northridge, at the Archaeological Center at Northridge University, and said that they had started to demolish the chapel because it was seismically unsafe and they no longer could safely use the chapel. So in '73, they decided to go ahead and bulldoze the remaining the chapel down. And during that process, they encountered several human remains, as you can see on the left. So at that point, they remembered they had people buried in the chapel. And so that's when they called Dr. Kelly and had us come out and take a look at it. What you're seeing on the right is Father Freelo and Dr. Kelly in where they had put the foundations, the stone foundations for the building itself. The bulldozer had successfully removed the foundation, and as a consequence, they had exposed these remains. This is an overview of the site. The north is to the right, and the church is basically a east-west facility. You can see where they came in and removed the foundations of the building itself. So we put an all-volunteer crew together. We worked on pretty much every weekend for about 10 hours, and then we had people come out as available to do other work. We had a variety of different people there. That's me on the right.
All right.
One of the first things that we encountered was the physical remains that Father Freelo had uncovered. He had gone ahead and tried to expose some of the remains. He actually did a pretty good job of it, except the fact that he didn't take notes or things like that. But one of the things that we found that was really mystifying is that we found these two boxes under the sword. Now, basically, let's see. This area is where the tile floors for the mission or for the chapel were at. They all had fired clay tile floors. And so as we started to remove those tiles, most of them had been displaced by the bulldozer going across. You can see the marks here of the teeth of the bulldozer that had dug down to remove the tile. So during this process, we came up with these two squares in the middle of the floor, about 20 feet apart, and we're going, what are these things? And then we quickly found out they were full of human bone. And so we were going, where did these come from? This is not your typical coffin. Now, the coffins that we did find were heavily deteriorated. There was almost nothing left of them. We could find a few square nails and things like this, and a few beads, a few rosary beads and this type of thing. But we didn't find any kind of real outline. But these boxes were actually in quite good shape. And we realized fairly quickly is that they were actually fruit boxes from the local fruit packing plant that was just down the street. And they were full of human bone. And so we were going, where did these come from? We found a newspaper article from 1906 or so. And the newspaper article indicated that there was a crazy priest at San Fernando Mission who had dug up several of the burials from inside the church and had deposited them out on card tables in the front of the church for people to revere as they went by on the road. So we accepted, this is foolishly done, we accepted a newspaper article. It was probably the worst thing I'd ever done in my life was to not go beyond that. But it did fit the scenario in the sense of, here are these human bones. We didn't find any skulls in the two boxes. All we found were leg bones and ribs and bits and pieces of human remains. So, at the time, I was the dig foreman on the project. Dr. Kelly was the principal on the project. And this was my first experience as being more or less like a field director on the project. And so, we carefully excavated the boxes and the remains, and you can see from our menu board up there, we weren't terribly sophisticated at the time in terms of our ability to photograph. We had a guy who had a camera. Most of us didn't, and so he came out and took beautiful black and white pictures. He had one little problem, though, is he often would reverse the image on us. And we didn't realize that until we started going back through and trying to find out that, hey, the wording is backwards. These words are spelled backwards, you know. So that kind of clued us in. The picture on the right, where a lot of the photographs were like this, where you just couldn't make out what was on the page. So it taught me a lot about what you shouldn't do in this case. This is at the time, though, this is what was called a salvage excavation. We don't use that terminology anymore. At least I don't. I don't allow my personnel to use it either. What we're doing is controlled excavation with scientific purpose in mind. Salvage excavation is usually done without any concern, really. It's kind of like a hit and miss about take what you can out of the site and try to preserve what you can out of it. That's really what we were trying to do here. We weren't paid to do any of this work. It was all strictly volunteers. Occasionally, they would go out and buy us a hamburger from Bob's Big Boy that was close by. So that was cool with us. That was better than what we expected. Now, getting back to our crazy priest, this is the chapel here. This is a hand-drawn map that was done by Zephaniah Engelhardt. He was, if any of you have done research on the missions in California, you will know that name. The guy went out and he recorded every mission, and he tried to get as much background data as possible from each one of them. His notes are invaluable in any kind of research that's done on any of the missions in California. So in this case, he went out to the church with Belgai, who was the priest here. This is in 1904, and he went out, and Caterina Lopez, who was one of the foremost women in California, in the San Fernando Valley. Her husband and her were the ones that founded the first English language school in the San Fernando Valley. That was in Bannerman Reservoir. Mr. Jerry Gates excavated that site as part of his master's thesis for Northridge. So Engelhardt and Lopez and the priest went out and did this map. Caterina, her father, had been the major domo of the mission, and so he had a lot of knowledge about what was going on, and she was imparting some of that knowledge to Engelhardt so that they could identify where these burials are. These are names of some of the priests that were buried in the mission. They didn't know who all of them were, but at least they had some information on it. So it turns out in the article that I had read, now I didn't pick up on this map when I was a student here, because it was under Roger Kelly's in his file, and I wasn't privy to that particular file. I was the only one to write a report for this project for 30 plus years. So it was just a student paper that we had. And I decided that I couldn't die and not come back and finish this report. It had to be more than just this paper, or just this student paper. I mean, these were hand-typed. So I thought the site deserved a little better attention, and after having worked on 9 of the missions over California, I decided I had a little bit of the expertise that would lend itself to a better evaluation of the site. If anybody was going to go back and look at the site, it should be me. And so that's what led me to this map. So in the newspaper article that I had mentioned previously, what had happened is that the newspaper reporter had indicated the crazy priest and an old squaw who had lived in a teepee in a canyon had come to the mission and taken these bones out and put them on a table, and then they had reburied them in the thing. Well, it turns out this old squaw was Caterina Lopez. She's one of the foremost names in San Fernando Valley history. I mean, she built her own house in San Fernando. I think it's still the national landmark for its architecture. And certainly the woman knew what she was doing. And since she was related to the major domo, she did know what was going on. Belgai, what they had done is, rather than being the crazy priest, treasure hunters had come into the chapel and dug tunnels down to the altar to look for the gold that was there. And so when we were doing our field work out there, you could actually see the tunnels that had been filled in. And one of those tunnels went right to where one of the fruit boxes was at. So what they were actually doing, according to Belgai and Engelhardt, was they had found the remains, the bones had been dug up by these treasure hunters, and Belgai, all he was doing was putting them in a fruit box, and then reburying them. So rather than being the crazy priest, he turned out to be kind of like he was putting things back together again. So it was one of those things where you find out, for 30-odd years, I thought he was a crazy priest until I got back and got into the information and found out, no, this was not the case at all. So when you don't have any information to begin with, you're really cold on this kind of stuff, so you take what you can. So we thought we were great just to be able to find out about the fruit boxes, but there was more to that story. So this is the outline. This is the HABS building survey. If you deal with old structures, you'll often come across the HABS survey, Historic American Building Survey. And basically it was kind of a very Depression-era kind of service where people would go out and record these old buildings and try to get as much information about them as possible. The maps are incredibly detailed. They're splendid resources to be able to use. In this case, what we've done is we've overlaid the excavation area on top of the HABS drawing, so you can kind of see where things were at. The burials are marked in black and red throughout the area. So we also found the foundations for the foundations for the soldiers' barracks, which were over here. They're over there on that end. They're over there. Sorry. It's been 30 years.
Is that a map of the whole property, or?
That's just the building. That's just a measured drawing of just the chapel that we worked on. We were very lucky to have it. Of course, a lot of the HABS missions have HABS drawings for the facilities that are still there. So you can see what we lost in terms of where the bulldozer came down. The bulldozer came through here and took all of this out, took all of that out across the top, and then moved in that direction there. So one of the things that we found was the floor tiles in the sidewall of the trench that they removed the foundations from. So in looking at that, in looking at that, what we found out was that there was a lower foundation that you can see in this photograph that was below the foundations that had been removed. And they were also going in a different direction. Now see, here's the foundation area that had been removed, but then the bulldozer had clipped this piece here and then had clipped it up there on the other side. So we also found that there was a tile floor that was outside the foundations of the building. And we were going, so what is this? Now at the time, I wasn't smart enough to figure out what we were actually looking at. But now we know that it was probably an earlier building that bisected, or the church had bisected when they built this. This is the second church or the third church that you're looking at. So this actually could be the second church, the foundation for the second church, because we also found a burial on top of it. So that meant that they were putting the burials in after they had knocked this older building down. So this building cuts across north-south into the area, to the cemetery area north of the chapel, as it is. Now I know this is hard to follow. I apologize for that, but this is the way it is. So you can see how deep it is too. The floor is about 2 or 3 feet, maybe 18 inches below the current grade. You've got to remember the grade's been bulldozed too. So the trench here you see here here's the altar rail. Here's where the altar was. So they dug a trench through here trying to find the gold under there. And this is a common misconception people had in the 1880s and the early 1900s, all through the history of it. People always thought there was buried gold in these places. So you see these like big giant gopher holes, through the site. Some of the things that we found was we actually found fabric that were mixed in with the coffins. We got coffin wood. We didn't find any ornamentation really. I've had a couple of experts look at this material, and they've been able to identify it as the woolen garments that the priests wore. So one of the things that I wanted to tell you about, or to leave you with in terms of this particular site, was that these sites are sitting in our museums and our universities that haven't been researched. They haven't been reported. And so one of the things I always want to encourage people to do is go back and look at those collections. It's our ethical responsibility as archaeologists to get this material reported on. I mean, I was determined to come back and do this report before I died so that we can get this material, so at least somebody would have a starting place for it. Because I can tell you, the notes for this excavation are really, really bad. We don't understand what some of the designations are. There was no, I made the master map, but some of the stuff just isn't on the map. It's because you have different people at different times doing different things. So not everybody had access to the map. And so people were doing things in the field that I didn't know about until I saw the bags. I mean, there was a burial that we had that I didn't even know about. So this is one of the things what happens when you organize an excavation like this and you're not prepared to do it. So it was one of those things you have to learn as you go and how to do it. And these are some of the problems that we're left with today. I think we've made a good case for being able to redo this report and report this information. So I think that we've been able to recover some of the information that's important. The fact that we know where this other building is now is a very important aspect in the management of that site. We've done several projects at the mission, and knowing that there's another building out here is very, very important. It will help us to be able to identify it at some point down the road. Now, the other site I want to tell you about is the Campo de Cahuenga site. And this is the reverse of the other one, where we had all the money we wanted, more or less, and we had all the time in the world to do it. And we had incredible support from the Metropolitan Transportation Authority. The guy who was in charge of our group on the MTA, he was very much a preservationist. And also, the other group that was involved in this was the Campo de Cahuenga Historical Association. That's not quite their name. That's like several other words long, Memorial Association or something like that. So they were in place as well, and they proved to be a pivotal aspect of what eventually developed on this project. This is where Andres Pico and Fremont signed the armistice between the American forces and Mexican forces during the Mexican-American War. This is a painter's reconstruction of the building during the signing. And at the time, the building was supposedly abandoned. In this case, the history of the building was that this was a structure that was built by a man named Tomás Feliz. And Tomás was supposedly the guy who built this particular building, and this was the lore and literature for up to our project in the 90s. And basically, we kept looking into Tomás to find out who he was and why he was there, and we couldn't find any reference to him being alive during that period. There was a Tomás Feliz, but he wasn't born yet when this was taking place. So we were very suspicious about actually who this building was. And then when we started, this is at Cahuenga, Lancashire Boulevard at Universal Studios. It's across the street from Universal Studios in the big parking lot there. So here's our historical research that shows the building here. And it shows Native American structures across the road where the NBC headquarters is at. Here's another building. Didn't know that was there. So this is a probable building that looked kind of like it. This is at San Gabriel. In fact, one of the local historians had brought this picture into us and said, "This is the Campo building. I found a picture of the Campo building." And he said, but they had to reverse the photograph to make it work in terms of that. And so we got a little suspicious about that. Turns out this is actually a building in San Gabriel. So, this is the Campo de Cahuenga Park. It's a city park. It's in the parking lot across the street from Universal. You can go there. You have to check to find out when it's open. The hours are really sketchy. But this is the existing building. This was made sort of a library kind of structure that was built in the 1950s. So here's the park. Here's Landersham down here. Here's the park. And there's the parking lot here. And people would go there to have their lunch and things like this. So our research concentrated on this. We knew the Campo Cahuenga building was there because in the 1930s, a high school teacher with his students had come out and found it. He didn't leave a map. So we never did know exactly where the building was. We just knew it was out there somewhere. So we had monitors on all of the excavations that were done in the Universal Station. This is the station that's under there now. This is 100 feet deep and 60 feet wide. And we monitor every inch of that removal. We had paleontologists at the bottom of it. One of the things that we found in this site, which has got nothing to do with Campo, but down here, we found a human bone at 45 feet. And so when I was present when it was found, and the workman pulled it out of the dirt, and he said, held it up for me, and I went over and picked it up, and I thought, wow, looks like a human tibia. No. Can't be 45 feet deep. No, this has got to be fossil. It's got to be something else. And so I put it in my collection bag, and we sent it over to people who were doing our bone work for us at the time. Was at the Natural History Museum. So they identified it as human bone. We then came back, and this was in 2001, after like March of 2001. So we had sent it into the FBI. One of the professors at UCSB has had contacts with the FBI, and we wanted to do DNA on this, see if we could get any DNA out of this bone. Well, unfortunately, that happened to coincide with all of the deaths at the Twin Towers. So our bones sat and languished for months and months and months while they processed the remains from the Twin Towers. So eventually, we found we did not have any DNA left in the bone. But we were able to radiocarbon date the bone, and it turned out to be 6,000 BP.
Oh, wow.
So what we found out from the geologists and the coring that had been done here is that this part of Lancashire was actually a buried canyon. And what had happened is that there was, let's see, the mountains are over where I'm standing over here, and they slope down like this. And there's a canyon that goes down and hits the valley floor. And it was filled in over hundreds of thousands of years. We actually found trees, wet trees, no leaves, 100 feet deep. And so it was just amazing what survived that death. But she was only at 45 feet deep. And so what we think she probably did is, Phil Walker did our analysis for us at UCSB. So even though he had only one bone, Phil was never one that was reluctant to make an interpretation or speculate on the sex or the age of the bone. He did it from a statistical analysis of the bones and said, this fits a woman, 20 years old, and I was going, I always thought you couldn't do that. But Phil was one of these guys that just knew his stuff, and he had his statistics to back him up. I wasn't going to argue with him. So he said it was a woman in her 20s, and that she had probably died someplace up in the top of the canyon, and then her bones had been washed down. So this is sort of an aside that you never know what you're going to find, and it's amazing sometimes. So anyway, so we were out monitoring one day, and we found some foundation stones, or a cluster of stones. Now, we had done enough monitoring out there that we knew that finding stones in this soil was rare. You could find them, but basically you're not, every time you find a stone, it was probably put there by a person. So then underneath that, right underneath the grass, right under the sidewalk, we found these tile floors. So they were less than 5 inches deep. Now, the gardener out there was a city gardener. I'm not besmirching them or anything, but they had a preservation angle, and they decided they weren't going to dig through those tile floors. They were going to put the sprinklers on top of those floors and save themselves some digging. Because I can tell you that those stones were in there really well, as well as these tiles. So what they did is they put all the sprinkler lines were on top of the tile floors, and this preserved them. It kept them wet, which ultimately backfired on us because as soon as we pulled those sprinklers and that grass off, they started to dry out. So it was a constant battle of keeping. We used soil material to cover it. Barafi was the material, it's the geotextile that we used to protect this site, and we kept it covered so that we wouldn't lose any of the material. But what we found out is that these tile floors were all intact. And in one room in particular, here's more of the foundations. This is the outline of the building as we knew it at the time. And here's the courtyard. We can find these walls. We were digging out here. We found in this room, all of the floor tiles had dog paw prints in them. So we thought at that point, if this is Tomas Felice's place, why has he got mission floor tiles like this? Now, did he go back in and scavenge these tiles? Which is usually what you find, is that you find that they've come back in during the Mexican period, and they've stripped the mission buildings of their floor tiles and roof tiles to do it. But this just seems so odd that they had access to all of these tiles with the paw prints in. The whole room was done up with paw prints.
There were actual paw prints like imprinted into the tile?
Mm-hmm. So what they would do is they would make 1,000 of these floor tiles. They would have a mold for it, and they put the clay in there, and then they'd set them out in the sun and let them dry. Well, if the kid watching the floor tiles was not paying attention, or maybe it was an act of resistance, you might think of it that way, he just let the dogs run all over it. You can see the prints, you can see different size prints going in different directions on the same tile, this kind of thing.
Wow.
So what we found is that the room, that one particular room, had all these paw prints in it. Now, all of this was slated for destruction. The MTA was going to take all of this and move the highway, Lancashire Boulevard. You guys know where Lancashire Boulevard is? It's an unholy street. And so what they do is they were going to take all of this and they were going to widen the street out to here and destroy all of this area here. So at that point, we realized that we might have something other than a Mexican period building, which would still be significant. But it was starting to look like, since all the floors were tiled, that we probably had a Spanish period building. So I hired Leonard Pitt and Ed McKimbrough, Leonard Pitt is one of the foremost historians in Southern California. And Ed McKimbrough is an expert on adobes, and she is also one of the foremost experts in California on mission architecture. So we hired these two to come in and analyze this. And what they found out was that Tomas Feliz was indeed not the owner of this. This was an outpost of the San Fernando Mission. This was on the south side of the Los Angeles River, and this was used as a cattle outpost for the mission when they had floods in the LA River. The ford for getting across the LA River was just to the north of where we are here. This building is 12 miles from the San Fernando Mission. So they were able to pretty much identify this location as the original Campo de Cahuenga, but it was also where the armistice was signed, but also where the mission had originally built it. So we found all these floors, and then we started monitoring when they did the median here. We started monitoring it, and we found the foundations out here as well. So we realized that the building actually was quite huge, and it was every time we worked on it, it got bigger. So NBC Studios is here, and they had already built all of this, and based on our extrapolation of this, we felt that this part of the building minimally would come down to at least where the sidewalk is at. So we were looking at their property as perhaps being the southerly terminus of that building. Based on the size of the building, if you just take it to here, to connect it to here, this building is about 200 feet long and it's about 40 feet wide. It's a major building, which also made us doubt that it was Mexican period construction. So you can also see it had a center bearing wall through here, and then the exterior walls here. The walls are a meter thick, or the foundations are a meter thick, and so they had a fairly substantial building on it. We think it was probably 1.5 stories, and it was probably used for storage and living quarters for the ranch hands. So at this point, we started agitating against the MTA to revise their construction plans to preserve this part of the building. We realized that this was unique, it was intact, it was only within inches of the surface, and we said, hey, this building is important to the history of the San Fernando Valley. And they said, no, we have a deal with NBC that we're going to widen the street there. So we were going, well, but if you do that, you're going to destroy all this, because they're going to go to build a street like this. They have to go 4 feet deep, they have to recompact it, and all of this good stuff to make it safe for traffic. So the local historical society, we got them on board with us, and they were happy to help, and they started raising political hell to be able to stop this particular construction. They asked us, the MTA asked us very politely that they were going to, or told us that they were going to destroy it. And so we continued to battle them with the Historical Society, and we started gathering local support from various communities and professional organizations to fight this. And so what we wound up doing is we stopped them. And what we did is, or what they did is, they built the street over the site. They left it intact. What they did is they raised the street up with rebar and metal bracing to actually span over the part of the site that was going to be affected by this. And so we were able to leave most of the street intact. And at that point, they were so resigned to the fact that they were doomed to do they couldn't do what they wanted to do. They actually stepped up the game, and they put the footprint in Lancashire of the building.
Oh, wow.
If you go out there today, well, maybe not. I think it's still there. But you go out there today, and you can actually see this in the street. This is a Google aerial photograph of the site. So this is where it was. These are the rooms that we believe were present there. It was a major accomplishment. And so then the MTA also decided that it should be interpreted. So within the park boundaries, they have an architect, Gil Sanchez, come in, who does a lot of mission restoration work. And we buried the tile floors and foundations because we knew that they wouldn't survive being exposed to the air and things like this. I really, really wanted people to walk where Andres and Fremont had walked. I thought it would be important to be able for them to actually step where these figures, so important in our history, had actually stepped and worked. But happier people prevailed in the sense that we didn't do that, because we realized that it would be eventually destroyed. LA City Parks is a group of people who are overworked and subject to budget cuts. So we realized that if we left LA City Parks to do maintenance on this exposed floor, it would quickly be destroyed. So we buried the whole site under soil and Marathi, the geotextiles, and then had Gil Sanchez recreate the foundations and the tile floors on top of the original ones, about 8 inches deep above the floor. So this is what you would see more or less today. These are modified adobe bricks. These are the foundations. These are the tile floors. We actually had paw prints made and the rest of the time. So we wanted to be accurate out there. We wanted to be accurate. So actually, my dogs contributed to the paw prints. So this is one of the exhibits that was set up. These are each one of these bars here is a bar along. We thought that was a nice added touch to it. Here's the. Unfortunately, what happened out there is that the bid went out to the lowest bidder. It was an MTA project, and that didn't count us though. And so these ruins here, these recreated ruins, are actually in ruin again, which is ironic to say the least. But these actually are all falling apart. So, and they've been repaired once already. I haven't been out there in a couple of years, so I don't actually know what the state is right now. But if you get the opportunity and want to see part of California history, this is the place to go. One of the crazy things about this was that we found almost no artifacts. Zero. We found, besides the human remain, we found one chert scraper. The very first day I went out to monitor on this site, I found the scraper. I found it in an unbelievably bad spot on top of a cinder block wall. I look at this and I'm going, wow! Somebody just idly picked up this beautiful church scraper and left it on a cinder block wall, right where I have to park. So I thought, this is fantastic, you know? And I thought, this place has got to be loaded with artifacts. That was the last artifact that we found. So, there was almost, yeah, I mean, you know, we know that the high school class had collected a few things, not a lot, but we also went back to John C. Fremont High School, which is where they were from, ironically, and went back to look, and nobody had any of the collection. They didn't have any field notes, and we couldn't find the ancestors of the high school teacher who had done the excavation. So it was kind of disappointing, but this is one of those cases where you are faced with the destruction of a significant piece of our history, and we were able to work with the MTA after, I'd say, a fairly acrimonious debate about how this should go forward, but they actually came around and said, we'll do the right thing, and so they did. And so this site is still present today, and it's for us to all enjoy. Here's the site again. So they do reenactments there, somewhere usually around January 13th to commemorate the armistice that was signed there. Questions? Yes?
So originally the LA River used to flow through the Cahuenga Pass versus where it's been rerouted downtown now?
No, sorry I didn't make that clear.
I just wanted to understand.
The LA River is, Lankershim Boulevard crosses the LA River just north of Universal Studios.
Yes, okay.
Okay. So the river has been rerouted to where it is now, but that was where the ford was. The original ford to cross the LA River was just up there. You'll cross over a bridge and you'll see it as you go across.
Okay.
They rerouted it, but it didn't ever come over the Cahuenga Pass.
Okay, that's,
Yeah.
yeah. That's why I wasn't sure.
The LA River goes where it wants to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Still.
yeah, still.
What is, I remember reading stories about, like La Cienega means the swamp, and how that the water flow here used to flow out to the ocean through La Cienega, kind of out there where Marina del Rey is. And then since they kind of, the river was cemented in and rerouted and the water doesn't percolate like it used to, it's changed significantly.
Yeah, there's a place over by the LA Zoo and the Griffith Park area where the water is forced up by stone buried. Well, it's like a batholith kind of thing almost.
Kind of where the bend is.
Yeah. So it flows up. It flows to the surface in that area to the west of Griffith Park. So that's where the water actually comes to the surface. There are tunnels that go down that were built built in the early 1900s that go down into the river and just suck all the water out.
Wow.
So even those things are still existing today as well. When we worked for the Los Angeles Bureau of Engineering, they found one and they said, well, you guys can go down there. I'm not going down there. Not happening. Get rid of their consultants the hard way. So
The one you're talking about the one built on Rio Del Rey, that's the Bologna Creek, Iona Creek. So it's not the same as, it doesn't drain the same way as the LA River. It's got a different drainage system. So it's
the LA River goes many different places.
Mm-hmm.
So
I know once we got industrialized or whatever, and they kind of fixed it to where was convenient, I guess, for how we live now, what have you, instead of it kind of flowing necessarily where it wanted to before. So.
How many of you saw that folder, that collection, in special collections last week about, was the 1938 or 9 flood in the San Fernando Valley, which was huge. It's huge. It just speaks to the, to what, when there's water, and there's all surprise, there are all these drainages flowing into the streets and in their own channelized ways. They get up out of those channels, and can cause a huge amount of damage.
These projects were quite interesting. The Campo project probably went to 150 meetings to try to preserve the site with the local people. We had council members come out there. The city council gave us a lot of support out there as well. So it was a educational project, to say the least. The San Fernando Mission project, the chapel project, was also educational and instructive, but it burned a hole in my heart when we did that job. Because they destroyed the rest of the chapel. They just simply said, you're done, you've had enough time, and so we took what we could, and then they threw us off the site, and that was the end of it. So, I was never even present when they actually finally did it. And what was another horrible thing, too, is that inside the chapel were all the Native American paintings that were done on the chapel walls.
Wow.
So all of those some of them were documented, but for the most part they weren't. Because you got to realize that every 10 or 20 years they would redo the paintings. So you could see, according to one of the docents that was present there, you could see the different layers of paint, pictures that were being destroyed as they took it apart. It was just, horrible. But there are still research opportunities that are left here. There are some, the clothing has to be analyzed, it has to be checked. And this here through the wall here. Yeah. So there's still research opportunities here, and I would urge you, if you have looking for a project to do, that you should consider at least taking these on, so that we can get more information. This is unbelievably rare to have some of this material here. I've worked on 9 of the missions. You don't find this stuff, especially the clothing like this. This is a unique opportunity to get information, and you'd be surprised at how many people that are experts in the field would be happy to help you. People and professors in Mexico, when they heard that we had one of these outfits from one of the friars, they were all over it. They wanted to help do it. Especially, even after we told them there was no money. Anybody else?
Other questions?
I'm sorry, I just
No,
have
go
a
right ahead.
lot of you were also mentioning about, you said there was a second structure underneath the chapel that you guys had rebuilt, and then possibly a third?
No, but we know that there was an earlier building there because of the perpendicular foundations, and because one of the burials was over the earlier foundation. So we know what direction it went into. It goes into the cemetery north of the chapel. I think it might be the second chapel that was built there, except for the fact that usually when they built the chapel, they built them so that it was east-west as opposed to north-south. So it could be another building, an earlier building that they just knocked down, although it did have a tile floor as well. So it'd be worth it to go back in and see if we could find out, get some pollen samples from under the tile floors and things like that. We tried to take pollen from this site. But what happened was because the bulldozer had come through, they had exposed too much of the ground surface. We couldn't tell what had been exposed and what hadn't been. So, and that was because we were young and naive and didn't know what we were doing. So we didn't understand enough of what was happening and what could happen. So we didn't take as many soil samples as we probably should have. So, and from when we knew that the tile had been moved and displaced, so we couldn't trust the samples. So you don't want to spend money on something where you think the results might be skewed, because then what is that going to tell you?
So I have a question for you. So if you take these two things as examples of the mission period landscape of the San Fernando Valley that have been preserved in various ways, what else is out there? Or what else is out here that we know of that could be dated to that time period?
Well, there's in Chatsworth Reservoir, you have sites there that we're not certain of the dates of those sites. You have lime kiln, you have a whole lime kiln construct out there that supposedly was handled by the local Native Americans from the mission. So you have Native American site on top of an Anglo period, American period site as well. So I've been out there. There's a lot of sites out there, and there's a Scorpion Canyon, El Canyon, that has a lot of sites in it too. So prehistoric and historical as well. So there is Limekiln Canyon itself is in the somewhere north center of the valleys. I think somewhere around Tampa up there. There's a major village up in that area, and that was probably from the mission period as well. And then Jerry Gates and his work at Van Horn Reservoir encountered Lopez adobe up there that Catarina Lopez has formed. We found burials up in the reservoir. Found one amazing burial up. It was an isolated individual. He had 10,000 beads on him. And they had three projectile points, 3 perfect projectile points, large bone alls, this kind of thing, all buried by himself. So it was just an amazing find. So that was also done through Northridge as well. There's a lot out there. You just have to be careful about, like Andres Pico's house is up at the mission, just to the south of the mission, and that's still intact. There's been some barrel excavations done through Northridge at that location back in the past, and I don't know if anything was ever written.
Well, I'll tell you, one of our missions with this class, and depending on your timing, you can go over and have a look at this with us. We pulled out the collections of the boxes from the Andres Pico Adobe work. Mostly because I've got no idea what's in those boxes, and I don't find evidence of the report. So, just for one of the things that we're trying to do here is to get a handle on the nature of some of these collections that have been underserved. What we'll do with them, what you can do with them in the classroom setting is somewhat limited, but at a minimum, we're going to open some boxes and maybe make some inventories and see what's on there. So, yeah.
You might want to talk to Rob Egbert
Yeah.
and Alan Garfinkel or Alan Gold. They were doing excavations out there. So
Edward, I see occasionally in Garfinkel.
So he might have some knowledge of that site. So I was actually when I was first married, had gone out to the my wife and I had gone out to the Andres Pico area, and they offered us a job there if I would do the electrical work on the building, and if my wife, my brand new wife at the time, they said, you could be a docent, and you could live on the top floor of the Andres Pico Adobe. Wow. There was a job. I said, and I said, electrical, huh? And they said, yeah. I said, well, I'd hate to be responsible for burning the place down. So we had to pass on that. But it's a great site. There's all kinds of, all of the structures to the west of the median between Andres Pico Adobe and the Mission are full of the Native American corpse. So that area is highly sensitive for Native American. The reason that Brand Boulevard or San Fernando, I forgot what the name of the street is right now, But the reason that street is the way it is right now is because of me. Is because I told them what was underneath that street. And I said, if you do anything there, it's going to cost you a bundle to go in there. Because if those Native American quarters should be present underneath that street. And underneath the Undertaker's building across the road. So there's quite a bit of area there that is quite sensitive. The dam that's out there from the mission is still present, and several of the aqueducts are probably still present as well. So there's quite a bit of the mission actually left, and it needs to be documented, and samples should be taken for preservation purposes so that we know how it was built. I mean, for classroom projects, you could go out and do the San Fernando Mission water system. Those things are all available.
Other questions? Well, let's give a round of applause. All right, let's take a break here, shall we? I encourage folks, because we're involved with this, we're interested in this kind of thing, to step up and introduce yourselves to John. And if you have any questions about Sea Sun Bowl, we can answer those too for you. But we'll talk about some archaeology. I should say, grad students, that he's a professional colleague, and it's, you never know, you might be looking for some people to work for him at some stage of the game. So a good quick elevator speech might be worth practicing here. Anyway, so let's take 10 minutes, say hi, and we'll reconvene here thereafter.